My Weird School, Book Number 11, Mrs. Kormel is Not Normal. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Palott. Chapter 8, Striker Smith's Final Battle. Ryan pulled the string up. There was nothing on the other end. Striker Smith was gone. Suddenly, the ride got all bumpy. Mrs. Kormel pulled off the side of the road. She opened the door and got out to see what was the matter. "You're in big trouble, AJ," Andrea said. "So's your face," I replied. Mrs. Kormel came back on the bus. She was holding Striker Smith in her hand, or what was left of him anyway. His head was gone. So was one of his legs and the arm that used to hold his sword. I felt bad. My parents probably paid a lot of money to get me this cool action figure, and now it was totally crushed. On the other hand, it is also a well-known fact that crushing stuff and pulling the limbs off action figures is cool. All in all, I was just happy that show and chair was over. It wouldn't be very cool to show the class an action figure that was missing an arm, a leg, and his head. "Who does this belong to?" asked Mrs. Kormel. Andrea looked at me. I looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at me. Mrs. Kormel looked at me. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I had to think fast. I said, "Who does this belong to?" "Striker Smith belongs to a secret organization of crime fighters," I said. I thought Mrs. Kormel was going to be really mad, but she just told us all to get off the bus. She said we had a flat tire and she was going to call Mr. Klutz to send somebody out to fix it. In the meantime, we'd have to wait outside. "Now we're going to miss lunch," one of the mean fifth graders complained. "Who cares about lunch?" said somebody else. "We're going to miss recess." "It's all Arlo's fault," said Andrea. "It is not," I said. "It is too." "Oh yeah?" I said. "Well, stupid begins with an S, and that's what you are." Ha ha ha, in her face. We all got off the bus. It was a quiet road, and there were no other cars or houses or people around. Me and Ryan and Michael went to look at the flat tire. Striker Smith's sword was stuck right in the tire, with his arm still attached to it. It was cool. It was like that story, The Sword in the Stone, except with a tire. Mrs. Kormel tried to call Mr. Klutz on her cell phone, but something was wrong, and she started stamping her feet and yelling. "Blix Blattinger!" she yelled. "My cell phone battery is dead." Mrs. Kormel said she would have to fix the flat tire herself. She told us to get our lunches and have a little picnic on the sidewalk while she got out her tools and the spare tire. Not everybody had brought a lunch bag because some kids buy the school lunch. They must be nuts. The school lunch is usually rubber hot dogs, chicken nuggets that bounce, and nachos that glow in the dark. I wouldn't eat the school lunch if I was starving and there was no other food left in the world. Mrs. Kormel asked us to share some of our food with kids who didn't bring a lunch. I gave my tuna sandwich to one of the first graders, but I kept my pudding treat. I always eat my treat first anyway. You should always eat your treat first, because if an asteroid hits the Earth in the middle of lunch and destroys the planet, well, at least you got to eat your dessert. That's the first rule of being a kid. First rule of being a kid. It would be a major bummer if the Earth was destroyed by an asteroid and you didn't have the chance to eat dessert. "Hey," Ryan said. "Look what I found." It was Striker Smith's head. Ryan found it at the side of the road. We decided right away to hold a funeral for the head. Michael dug a little hole in the dirt, and we dropped the head into it. Some of the other boys on the bus gathered around. Farewell, Striker, Ryan said solemnly. You defeated the mighty Tyre. You sacrificed your life so that others might not have to go to school. You paid the ultimate price, made the ultimate sacrifice, so that we can live in freedom from reading, writing, and arithmetic. Long live Striker Smith. We will always remember you. It was really sad. I almost cried when Michael said a little prayer. Ashes to ashes, dust to dusted. We buried Striker Smith because he was busted. He was really cool, but now he's dead. It's hard to live when you don't have a head. We covered up Striker's grave, and Ryan said we should have a moment of silence in honor of our fallen superhero. It was really quiet. Then, in the middle of our moment of silence, Andrea said, "Boys are dumbheads." Chapter 9. We are survivors. Finally, Mrs. Kormel fixed the flat tire and said we could get back on the bus. She was all sweaty, and her hair was messed up, and her hands were covered with grease. She looked too tired to be mad at me or Mr. Klutz or anybody else. She just got into her bus driver's seat and hit the gas. The bus lurched forward, and we all fell back in our seats. It was really late. Andrea complained that we might have missed social studies. Ha ha ha, that was fine with me. I hate social studies. Why is it called social studies anyway? Mrs. Kormel was driving fast. We were far from school. It looked to me like we were still in the middle of nowhere. The road was really bumpy, and it was wet from the rain. Mrs. Kormel was having trouble keeping the bus in the middle of the road. I was afraid she might drive right off the side of the road. And what happened next was the most amazing thing in the history of the world. Do you want to know what happened? I'm not going to tell you. Well, okay, I'll tell you. Mrs. Kormel drove right off the side of the road. "Bix Blattinger!" shouted Mrs. Kormel. The bus skidded to a stop. Some kids even fell out of their seats. It was hilarious. You should have been there. "Is everybody okay?" Mrs. Kormel asked. "Yeah," me and Michael and Ryan said. "That was fun. Can we do it again?" "We're stuck in a ditch," said Mrs. Kormel. "We're not going anywhere." "What are we going to do now?" asked Emily. She looked like she was going to cry. I was amazed that Emily hadn't cried yet. She usually can't go 5 minutes without crying about something. "I don't know what to do," Mrs. Kormel said sadly. "My cell phone is dead. I guess we'll just have to wait for help to arrive." "Too bad Striker Smith isn't here," I said. "He would know what to do." "If you hadn't thrown that dumb doll out of the window, none of this would have happened," yelled Andrea. "He's not a doll," I yelled right back at her. "Zingy zip," yelled Mrs. Kormel. Everybody was really depressed. We just sat there on the bus. There was nobody around. No houses, no stores, no nothing. Nobody was going to rescue us. It felt like we had been on the bus 1,100,000 hours. It occurred to me that we might not only miss the rest of the school day, we might miss the rest of our lives. We could sit there forever. We could die out there. Suddenly, I felt hungry. I wished I hadn't given my sandwich to that first grader. I was starving. I was afraid my stomach might eat itself. My friend Billy, who lives around the corner from me and was in 2nd grade last year, told me he once heard about some guy who was stranded on an airplane and he ate a seat cushion to survive. We might have to eat the seat cushions, I told Michael and Ryan. Ryan looked at the seat cushion. There's something you need to know about Ryan. He will eat anything, even stuff that is not food. One time, we gave him $1 to eat dirt. Ryan got down on the floor and took a little bite from the corner of the cushion. "Ugh," he said. "It's horrible." "Put some ketchup on it," suggested Michael. "Ketchup makes anything taste good." Michael gave Ryan a little ketchup packet from his lunch bag. Ryan put it on the seat cushion and took a tiny bite. "It's not bad, actually," Ryan said. Ryan is weird. It was so boring sitting there waiting for somebody to rescue us. I almost wished we were at school. Almost. I saw this reality TV show where some people were stranded on a desert island, Michael said. "It's not a desert island, dumbhead," Andrea turned around to say. "It's a desert island. 1S. Desserts is one of our spelling words this week." Then she held up her dumb flashcard with the word desserts on it. "Who asked you?" Ryan asked. "A desert island would be cool to be stranded on," I said. "There would be ice cream and candy and treats everywhere." "Hey, look," said Emily. "I just noticed that desserts is stressed, spelled backward." "So what?" asked Ryan. "Backward is drawcab backward." "Who cares what backward is backward?" asked Andrea. "Bus is sub-backward," I mentioned. "Bix Blattinger!" shouted Mrs. Kormel. "Will you please, Zingy Zip?" I couldn't blame Mrs. Kormel for being mad. It was a rough day for her. We had to whisper after that. "Hey," whispered Michael. "I just thought of something. Maybe we're on a reality TV show right now and we don't even know it." "That's impossible," Ryan whispered. "If we didn't know we were on a reality TV show, we wouldn't be talking about us being on a reality TV show." "I think Michael is right," I said, looking around to see if there were any hidden cameras. "Maybe this was all planned in advance for the reality TV show we're on right now." "Oh yeah?" said Andrea. "Who planned for you to throw your doll out the window and cause a flat tire?" "It's not a doll," I said. "Don't you have any respect for the dead?" "If this is a reality TV show," Ryan said, "we're going to have to vote somebody off the bus." "Why?" asked Emily. "Because that's what they always do on reality TV shows, dumbhead," I said. "You vote somebody off and they have to leave." "But why?" asked Emily. "Because that's the rule," Michael told Emily. "She doesn't know anything about reality TV shows." "I vote for Andrea," I said. "I vote for AJ," Andrea said. "Ooh," Ryan said. "AJ and Andrea voted for each other. They must be in love." "When are you gonna get married?" asked Michael. "If those guys weren't my best friends, I would hate them." Chapter 10. Mrs. Kormel is driving us crazy. We couldn't just sit around on the bus forever. Soon we would die of starvation or kill each other just like they do in the movies all the time. "We've got to do something," Emily said. For once, she was right. That's when I got the most genius idea in the history of the world. There must have been at least 20 kids on the bus. If we all got out and pushed, maybe we could push the bus out of the ditch. I got up and told Mrs. Kormel about my genius idea. At first, she thought I was crazy and told me to go limp as Cadoodle. But I guess she thought it over and decided to give it a shot. "Okay, everybody off the bus," she yelled. We all got off the bus and went to the back. "When I say push, everybody push," Mrs. Kormel yelled out the window. 1, 2, 3, push! I pushed with all my might. Everybody was grunting and groaning and moaning. The bus didn't move. "Harder!" yelled Ryan. And then the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. The bus started moving. Hooray! Everybody yelled. Mrs. Kormel steered the bus back onto the road, and we all piled in. She told me my idea was great and promised to drive carefully the rest of the way to school. The only one who wasn't happy was Andrea. She was looking at her watch. Now we've missed music class, she complained. That was fine with me. I hate music. You know, Michael said, maybe Mrs. Kormel isn't a bus driver at all. Did you ever think of that? Yeah, Ryan said. Maybe she captured our real bus driver and has her tied up in a cage. Stuff like that happens all the time, you know. Stop trying to scare Emily, Andrea said. Maybe we're being kidnapped, I added. Maybe Mrs. Kormel is driving us to our secret underground hideout at the North Pole, where she's going to do unspeakable things to us. Like what things? Emily asked, all worried. I can't tell you, I told her. They're unspeakable. We've got to do something, Emily said. I don't want to go to the North Pole. That girl will fall for everything. Emily probably wanted to run away, but there was no place to run. She was stuck on the bus, so she started crying. What a baby. Once Emily started crying, it set off a chain reaction, and other kids started crying too. Some of the first graders said they wanted their mommies. Some kid peed in his pants. Everyone was freaking out. The fifth graders made a sign and put it in the back window. Help! Our bus driver is driving us crazy. I didn't cry. I figured that it would be pretty horrible to be kidnapped and driven to the North Pole. But at least we wouldn't have to go to school anymore. And they have penguins at the North Pole too. Or maybe that's the South Pole. Either way, penguins are cool. Are we there yet? Somebody asked. Knock it off! Yelled Mrs. Kormel. Chapter 11. We finally meet the nude kid. The bus turned a corner and we saw the big sign, Elementary School. We're there yet, announced Mrs. Kormel. Yippee! Yelled all the girls. Boo! Yelled all the boys. Mrs. Kormel pulled the bus up to the curb and Mr. Klutz came running over. Bingo boo, he said. What? But he never got the chance to finish his sentence, because at that moment the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. Mrs. Kormel must have leaned against the magic stop sign button by accident, because the magic stop sign on the side of the bus swung out at the exact same time as Mr. Klutz arrived. The stop sign smacked Mr. Klutz on the side of his bald head. He fell down. It was a real Kodak moment. Those stop signs are dangerous. We all rushed off the bus to see if Mr. Klutz was okay. He stood up slowly. He looked like he'd been in a fight or he'd drunk too much beer. What happened? He asked. The stop sign hit you in the head, said Mrs. Kormel. I'm so sorry. No, I mean, why were you so late? Asked Mr. Klutz. Everybody started telling Mr. Klutz what happened. We had a flat tire. We got kidnapped and drove to the North Pole. We went to the nude kid's house. AJ threw a doll out the window. Ryan ate a seat cushion. We got lost in the rainforest. We pushed the bus out of a ditch. We had a funeral for Stryker Smith's head. Well, I'm just glad you're all safe, said Mr. Klutz. Did we miss the big spelling test? Asked Andrea. Oh, your teacher, Miss Daisy, was out sick today, said Mr. Klutz. So your class had a substitute teacher named Miss Todd. You'll have your spelling test tomorrow. Yippee! Yelled all the girls. Boo! Yelled all the boys. While we were yelling, the school bell rang. The front door opened and kids started pouring out. "It's 3 o'clock," said Mr. Klutz. "Everybody back at the bus. It's time to go home." "Home?" said Andrea. "But we just got here." "Bix Blattinger!" yelled Mrs. Kormel. "Hey, wait a minute," I said to Mr. Klutz. "Where's the nude kid?" "Nude kid?" said Mr. Klutz. "What are you talking about, AJ?" "You know," I said, "the kid we were going to pick up before we got lost." "Oh," said Mr. Klutz. "You mean the new kid. He's not nude, he's new. Here he comes now." This kid came over to the bus. He looked pretty normal. He even had clothes on. "What's your name?" Ryan asked him. "Neil." "Really?" Michael asked. "Yeah, my name is Neil Crouch." "Is that your real name?" I asked. "Neil Crouch?" "Sure it is," he said. "Why?" "Well," I explained, "if your name is Neil Crouch, that means you can kneel and crouch on the bus." "Why would anybody want to kneel or crouch on a bus?" asked Neil Crouch. "Because we're not allowed to," we all yelled. Sheesh, the nude kid has a lot to learn about being a kid. He's weird. Me and Michael and Ryan decided to keep calling Neil Crouch the nude kid, even if he did wear clothes. We all got back in the bus, and Mrs. Kormel pulled out of the driveway. "Maybe she'll get us back home before we die of starvation. Maybe we'll find out what Bix Blattinger means. Maybe I'll talk my parents into getting me another Striker Smith action figure. Maybe Neil Crouch will learn how to be a kid. Maybe I'll pass the big spelling test tomorrow." But it won't be easy.